The Middle Ages are often portrayed as a time of ignorance and superstition, when men were kept chained in intellectual darkness by a church which feared independent thought. Thankfully, scholars are increasingly debunking this myth, revealing a medieval world where education and knowledge were not only encouraged but highly valued. In this episode of Historia Verax, we will learn about the educational opportunities of the Middle Ages, how people were educated, and how the medieval world gave us the modern university. During the early Middle Ages, in the centuries immediately after the fall of the Roman Empire, Christian monasteries were the only places in Western Europe where education was carried out in any formal sense. Education focused on preparing candidates for the life of a monk, but it was not restricted to such. The sons of nobles who were destined to rule would often be sent to monasteries for education, and even the sons of commoners were accepted if they showed promise. Girls might be educated as well, but typically they were taught through the engagement of private tutors. Though usually confined to a single abbey, these monastic schools could occasionally be quite extensive. St. Enda's monastic school on Inishmore in Ireland, for example, was a sprawling complex comprised of 8 monasteries supporting several thousand monks and pupils. In time, however, dioceses began assuming direction for education within their territories. This process began in earnest in France during the Carolingian era, largely due to the efforts of Charlemagne. Charlemagne, first king and then emperor of the Franks, undertook a systematic reform of education throughout his vast empire. Under the recommendation of the Anglo Saxon monk Alcuin, whom Charlemagne had brought to his court to oversee the promotion of education, the emperor issued several decrees, called capitularies, that tackled educational reform. At the heart of these efforts was the education of the clergy. Recognizing that most education happened through the church, much of Charlemagne's legislation focused on bishops and monasteries. In his famous educational capitulary of the year 787, Charlemagne decreed the following quote, "We have judged it to be of utility that in their bishoprics and monasteries committed by Christ's favor to his charge, care should be taken that there should not only be a regular manner of life, but also the study of letters, each to teach and learn them according to his ability. Let there, therefore, be chosen for the work of teaching men who are both willing and able to learn, and let them apply themselves to this work with a zeal equal to the earnestness with which we recommend it to them." Another of Charlemagne's capitularies from the year 789 said that every monastery and abbey was to have its own school, in which boys might be taught the Psalms, as well as the system of musical notation, singing, arithmetic, and grammar. Charlemagne's concerns went beyond the clergy, however. This emperor envisioned a Christian education available to all children of his domain, regardless of their social status. To secure this worthy goal, another capitulary of 796 commanded that education be provided free to children of the countryside to be supervised by the local clergy. Quote, "We command that the priests establish schools in every town and village, and if any of the faithful wish to entrust their children to them to learn letters, that they do not refuse to accept them, but with all charity teach them, and let them exact no price from the children for their teaching, nor receive anything from them save what parents may offer voluntarily and from affection." These reforms were so successful at raising the standards of education throughout the West that historians have dubbed the period the Carolingian Renaissance. One of Charlemagne's decrees, known as Opistola de Lateris Scolendis, charged bishops particularly with upholding the educational quality of the clerics under their charge. After complaining that clerics of the realm were not sufficiently educated, Charlemagne ordered that all priests be instructed in the mastery of letters, and that such men truly are to be chosen for this work as have both the will and the ability to learn and to instruct others, he said. Thus, bishops gradually assumed responsibility for education throughout Western Europe towards the end of the first millennium. Education under the bishops centered on the cathedral, the bishop's official residence, and the seat of his authority. These institutions were known as cathedral schools. Their golden age spanned the years from around 1000 to 1150, during which every major cathedral had its own school. These schools not only catered to children, but to young men destined for higher studies. Cathedral schools competed to retain the most notable masters as an incentive to attract students. A student seeking higher education in the year 1100 could learn at the feet of any number of intellectual luminaries. At Tournai, he could learn from Master Odo, skilled in the seven liberal arts, but especially in dialectics. At Leon, the fame of Master Anselm was drawing pupils from all over the continent, while in Noyon, one could study the grammatical teachings of Master Gourmundus. Chartres was undergoing an educational revival under the administration of Bishop Ivo, and in Paris, one could learn rhetoric and dialectic from the renowned Master William of Champeaux. And to many other schools one might go if he wanted to study the scriptures and the church fathers under the tutelage of the brightest minds of the Latin West. The cathedral schools provided a rich variety of educational opportunities across Europe, offered from the hands of masters who had the reputation of celebrities in their day. But the age of the cathedral schools proved transitory, as sometime between 1150 and 1200 they evolved into what would become the university. The development of the university out of the cathedral school was the result of three innovations: new content, new organization, and the rise of faculties. We shall consider content momentarily, but first let us speak of organization and faculty. The popularity of cathedral schools resulted in thronged concentrations of students in Europe's major cities. For example, around 1150, the schools of Paris were divided into three groups: the schools of the Cathedral of Notre Dame, which were under the Bishop of Paris, the schools of the Canons of St. Victor, and the schools of the Abbey of St. Genevieve. Paris was becoming what we would think of today as a college town. As the 12th century wore on, students began to think of themselves as corporate bodies, distinct from the cathedral or monastery to which they were attached. They began to think about their rights and duties collectively, in a spirit we might describe as unionist. At Bologna in Italy, students pooled their resources together to hire their own masters. They negotiated with their host cities about students' rights and bargained with professors over tuition. We see them engaged in strikes over content, curriculum, and faculty, as in the famous Paris strike of 1229, which had to do with the rights of city governments to punish unruly students. The rise of faculty was also a reflection of this new corporate spirit. Masters were organized into four faculties, from the Latin word facultatum, which means ability or capability. Faculties were organized according to their interests and fields of study: theology, philosophy, law, and medicine. University documents of the time compared these four faculties to the four rivers of paradise, and the faculty embodied the collective spirit of the masters, ensuring adherence to academic standards, negotiating for pay and privileges, and jostling for the prestige of their respective fields. The medieval faculty were thus precursors to our modern university departments. The new organization of students and the rise of faculty blossomed into the university, which comes from the Latin word universitas, the old Roman phrase for a corporation or group. 20th century medievalist Maurice de Wulf explains the transition from cathedral school to university in terms that were gradual, truly organic in development. De Wulf says, quote, "The university eclipsed the episcopal and monastic schools and thereby replaced the spirit of localism with that of a centralization in study. It arose not indeed through a decree of the government or a committee of trustees, but as a flower grows from its stem, by a natural convening of masters and pupils, for their number had multiplied as a result of the constant development of studies. Now, the word universitas initially referred to the people, the students and faculty, not to a building nor to a place. The universitas was conceived of in the spirit of the old medieval guilds, a union of persons in the pursuit of a common goal. In this case, education. But we must still discuss the new content, for it's here that the most revolutionary aspect of the medieval university is displayed in all its splendor. Until the High Middle Ages, educational content in the West was drawn primarily from the Bible, church fathers, and the literature and natural history of the classical Latin authors. The works of Greek and Arabic writers remained largely unknown in the West. But beginning in the 11th century, translations of Arabic works into Latin began filtering into Europe. These translators were principally interested in Arabic editions of ancient Greek authors, such as Galen and Aristotle, but original Arabic texts were translated as well. For example, the philosophical writings of Avicenna and Averroes. How did these Arabic texts come into Western Europe? Well, some made their way west on the trade routes opened by the Crusades, while others came north through Islamic Spain. The translation of Arabic works into Latin was mostly the labor of thousands of anonymous monastic scribes, but the names of a few exemplary men have come down to us, such as Constantine the African, an 11th century Benedictine who translated Arabic medical works, and Gerard of Cremona of the 12th century, who personally translated over 60 books on science, math, and philosophy. The injection of classical scientific and philosophical texts into Latin Christendom brought about a revolution in the intellectual life of the West. The most potent result of this was a lively interest in the capacity of human reason to penetrate the mysteries of the world. Driven by Aristotelian logic, there was a bold endeavor to apply deductive logic to every facet of human knowledge, including theology. The theologian Anselm of Canterbury exemplified the new learning in his work Proslogion, which was an attempt to demonstrate the existence of God from pure logic. Anselm's Proslogion drew intense criticism. Some found his arguments unconvincing, but others argued that one should not depend upon logic to prove theological truths, which are matters of faith. This is important to understand, as the 12th century debate about the propriety of logic used in theology is often misconstrued as a reaction by backward thinking clerics who dismissed logic because they were afraid of independent thought. The truth is far more nuanced. Nobody doubted the usefulness of logic, they merely questioned its applicability to truths of faith, which by definition were beyond the scope of human reason to grasp unaided by divine revelation. By the middle of the 13th century, the universities of Europe had wholly embraced the new learning. The validity of logic applied to theological questions was universally accepted. Greek and Muslim authors were eagerly studied by a new generation of university pupils, and all over Europe there was a fresh thirst for scientific knowledge. The 13th century is often called the medieval Golden Age. This is certainly true pertaining to education. The 13th century was a unique moment in Western civilization, when medieval Christendom wed itself irrevocably to the best wisdom of the ancient world, bringing forth the full flowering of Christian rationalism. The educational climate of the universities was deeply rationalist, committed to the idea that reason was an ancilla fidei, that is, a handmaiden to theology. This analogy is so familiar that perhaps its beauty is lost on us. A handmaiden waits on a noblewoman. One of her most important duties is to assist the noblewoman during childbirth. In this analogy, the noblewoman is faith. Faith gives birth to its child, knowledge, But this birth is assisted by the handmaidens of reason who help deliver knowledge into the world. Lest we think that reason is being relegated to an inferior position by assuming the status of a servant, consider the importance of the handmaiden in childbirth. She saw to the comfort of the mother, bringing water and fresh linens. She talked the laboring woman through her contractions and received the child when it came out of the womb, as well as caring for the mother in recovery. No woman, then or now, would wish to go into labor without such persons on hand to provide these aids. The handmaidens ensured delivery goes as smoothly as possible. A woman compelled to give birth without their aid would suffer immensely. Similarly, the delivery of knowledge into the world would be greatly imperiled without the assistance of reason. The educational renaissance of the universities was overseen by two new religious orders, the Dominicans and the Franciscans. Both orders would be at the forefront of the intellectual development of the West for over the next 100 years. The 11th through the 13th centuries were a time of extraordinary maturation in scientific thought throughout the Christian West. The creative energy of the period was largely due to the emergence of the university system and the academic independence it permitted. While it is true that church authorities placed certain limits on inquiry, that does not mean they were opposed to the advance of knowledge. If anything, the limits imposed were meant to ensure the integrity of academic discussion. But on a more fundamental level, the university established academic freedom through its institutional independence. The earlier monastic and cathedral schools had fulfilled an educational function, but only within the larger religious mission of the abbey or the cathedral. The university, on the other hand, was an educational organization that was not embedded in any larger institution. It certainly fulfilled a religious function, but in or through its broader educational mission and not vice versa, as was the case of the monastic and cathedral schools. They were thus academically independent in the sense that academics were the overarching aim of the medieval university. Scientia gratia scientiae. Knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Well, there's certainly much more we could say about medieval education, but I think that is sufficient for today. Thank you for watching, and if you like this sort of content, please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what other sorts of subjects you'd like to see covered here on Historia Verax. And I'll see you in the next video.